In the lawless streets of Tombstone, Arizona, the most feared gunslinger in the West, a man with at least 5 confirmed kills, died with a fully loaded revolver in his hand, never firing a single shot. Johnny Ringo's death defied everything the Wild West stood for. Picture this: July 14th, 1882, Turkey Creek Canyon, Arizona Territory. A teamster named James Yoas guides his wagon through the narrow canyon trail when his horses suddenly rear back, spooked. Through the morning shadows beneath a massive oak tree, he sees something that will haunt the American frontier forever. A body. Not just any body. Johnny Ringo, the king of the cowboys, propped against the tree trunk with a bullet hole in his right temple. But here's what the history books won't tell you. Ringo's Colt 45 sits in his right hand, unfired. All 6 chambers loaded. In the world of gunfighters, this was impossible. Men like Ringo lived by one rule: you always kept one chamber empty under the hammer for safety. Yet, here was the deadliest gun in Arizona, dead with a fully loaded weapon that never fired. Within hours, 4 different men would claim credit for killing Johnny Ringo. 4 completely different stories, 4 conflicting timelines, and each one more impossible than the last. By the end of this video, you'll understand why the king of the cowboys' mysterious death changed the balance of power in the American frontier forever. You'll discover the hidden connection between Ringo's death and the Earp Vendetta ride. You'll learn why that loaded gun proves murder, not suicide. And most shocking of all, you'll discover the identity of his most likely killer. And it's not who the history books claim. This is the story of how the cowboys' reign of terror ended not with a blazing gunfight at high noon, but with a mystery that would echo through history. To understand how the West's most feared killer died defenseless, we need to go back to where the violence began. If you're fascinated by the untold mysteries of the Wild West's most legendary gunslingers, hit that like button and subscribe for more epic frontier stories. Now, let me take you back to a time when justice came from the barrel of a Colt 45. John Peters Ringo wasn't born a killer. In 1850, he entered this world on a small Indiana farm, the eldest son of Martin and Mary Ringo. Nobody could have predicted that this farm boy would become one of the most feared names in the American West. When Johnny was just 14, his family joined a wagon train heading for California. Then tragedy struck. His father died mysteriously on the trail, some say by his own hand. Young Johnny watched them bury Martin Ringo in an unmarked grave in the wilderness. The family settled in Gallatin, Missouri, where Johnny spent 7 formative years. Here's where the story takes a sinister turn. Those Missouri years transformed him. By 21, he could quote Shakespeare and speak fluent Latin, unusual for a frontier gunman. But education couldn't tame the darkness growing inside him. In 1875, Ringo drifted into Mason County, Texas, just as the region exploded into violence. The Mason County War pitted German settlers against American cattlemen in a brutal conflict over cattle rustling and blood feuds. Scott Cooley, a former Texas Ranger, led a vigilante group seeking revenge for his friend's murder. Johnny Ringo, now 25, joined Cooley's vendetta. Then something happened that defied all gunfighter code. On September 25th, 1875, Ringo committed his first known murder. He and another man ambushed John Worley, shooting him down without warning. This wasn't a fair fight, it was an execution. The Mason County War escalated. Ringo participated in multiple killings, spreading terror through the German community. When authorities finally arrested him, witnesses were too frightened to testify. The jury acquitted him. But Ringo had made a fatal mistake. He developed a taste for killing and whiskey. After briefly serving as a constable, imagine that, a killer wearing a badge, Ringo drifted west. By 1879, he reached Arizona Territory. In the mining camp of Galeyville, his reputation preceded him. Men stepped aside when he walked down the street. Women crossed themselves. He wasn't just another gunman. He was becoming something darker. What happened next would haunt Tombstone for decades. The silver boom had transformed Tombstone from a desert camp into a lawless boomtown, generating millions in wealth. 2 factions battled for control. The Earp brothers, representing business interests and their version of law and order, versus the cowboys, a loose confederation of rustlers, thieves, and killers who controlled the countryside. The cowboys needed a leader who could match the Earps' reputation for violence. They found their king in Johnny Ringo. Unlike the crude outlaws around him, Ringo brought education, cunning, and absolutely no mercy. Under his influence, the cowboys evolved from simple rustlers into an organized crime syndicate, stealing cattle from Mexico and selling them to government contracts, generating $500,000 annually, millions in today's money. But wait, it gets stranger. Ringo's very presence changed Tombstone's balance of terror. When he walked into a saloon, conversations died. When he drew his gun, men died. Yet he wasn't a simple killer. Witnesses described him quoting poetry while drunk, speaking of death and destiny. One survivor recalled Ringo saying, "Death is the only certainty in this uncertain world." By 1881, Johnny Ringo had become the Dark Prince of the Cowboys, feared even by his own allies. But in Tombstone, he would meet his match. The stage was set for the confrontation everyone feared was coming. The Cowboys weren't just outlaws, they were an army. Led by Newman, Old Man, Clanton and his sons, the gang included over 100 members controlling southern Arizona territory. They had judges in their pockets, Sheriff Johnny Behan as their protector, and a rustling network stretching from Mexico to New Mexico. But what made them truly dangerous was their enforcer, Johnny Ringo. Here's what the history books won't tell you about how Ringo earned his crown. While other cowboys killed for profit, Ringo killed for darker reasons. Tom Graham, who rode with the gang, later testified, "Ringo enjoyed it. You could see it in his eyes when he pulled the trigger. This wasn't about money, this was about power through terror." Enter Doc Holliday, the other educated killer in Tombstone. A dentist dying of tuberculosis, Holliday had nothing to lose and matched Ringo's reputation for sudden violence. These two men circled each other like predators, recognizing their own kind. Then came the revelation that shocked even hardened lawmen. On January 17th, 1882, Tombstone's Allen Street became the stage for a confrontation that would seal both men's fates. Ringo, drunk and looking for trouble, encountered Doc Holliday outside the Grand Hotel. Witnesses heard Ringo challenge. "All right, Lunger, let's finish this," Holliday replied with cold precision. "All right, you son of a bitch. Let's go." Both men reached for their guns. The street cleared in seconds. But before either could draw, Tombstone police intervened, arresting both. Judge William Stilwell, in the Cowboys' pocket, fined them $30 each and released them. Justice in Tombstone came with a price tag. This is where the official story falls apart. The Earp-Cowboy conflict was spiraling toward war. Virgil Earp, ambushed in December, lost the use of his left arm. The Cowboys had drawn first blood, but on March 18th, 1882, they made their fatal error. Morgan Earp was playing billiards when assassins fired through a door window, killing him instantly. What nobody expected was Wyatt Earp's transformation. The lawman became an avenger. Within days, he formed a federal posse, the legendary Vendetta Ride, to hunt down Morgan's killers. The Cowboys scattered like roaches before a flame. Here's the detail that changes everything. Sheriff Behan, desperate to stop Earp's rampage, deputized Johnny Ringo and 19 other cowboys. Think about that. The most notorious killer in Arizona wearing a lawman's badge, hunting the territory's most famous lawman. The irony was lost on no one. But Ringo had something his killers didn't expect. Unlike other cowboys who fled to Mexico or New Mexico, Ringo stayed in Arizona, moving between Galeyville, Tombstone, and the Chiricahua Mountains. He was either supremely confident or had a death wish. Witnesses from this period describe him drinking heavily, talking about destiny and doom. The Earp posse and Ringo's cowboys played a deadly game across the territory. On March 24th, the two forces nearly collided at Iron Springs. Curly Bill Brocius died in that fight, cut down by Wyatt's shotgun. The Cowboys' leadership was being systematically destroyed. Statistical shock. Within 3 months of Morgan's death, the Cowboys lost 8 key members dead or fled. Their $500,000 annual rustling operation crumbled. Ranchers who once paid protection now refused. The gang that terrorized Arizona was dying. But one detail everyone overlooked. During this chaos, Ringo's behavior changed dramatically. Pete Spence, a fellow cowboy, later testified that Ringo began drinking from sunrise to sunset, talking about meeting his fate. He gave away personal possessions, paid old debts, and spoke of death as an old friend coming to visit. What came next sent shockwaves through the territory. In May 1882, Wyatt Earp and his posse left Arizona, their vendetta seemingly complete. The Cowboys should have felt relief. Instead, Johnny Ringo grew more paranoid. He told multiple witnesses he was being watched, followed, hunted by shadows. The truth was darker than anyone imagined. Someone wanted the king of the Cowboys dead, and they were willing to wait for the perfect moment. the stage was set for the strangest death in Western history. July 1882 brought the beginning of Arizona's monsoon season and Johnny Ringo's final descent. Witnesses in Galeyville described a man coming apart at the seams. Billy Breckenridge, a deputy sheriff who knew Ringo, encountered him on July 8th and found him deep in his cups, rambling about death and destiny. Ringo reportedly said, "They're coming for me, Billy. I can feel them in the shadows." Here's where the story takes a sinister turn that history tried to hide. Multiple witnesses reported seeing Ringo in different places during his final days, creating an impossible timeline. Some placed him in Tombstone on July 9th. Others swore he was in Galeyville on the 10th. This confusion would later help his killer escape justice. Jerry Barton, a rancher, claimed Ringo stopped at his place on July 11th, asking for whiskey and ammunition. "He looked like death warmed over," Barton later testified, kept looking over his shoulder, hand on his pistol. But Barton's testimony conflicts with James Young, who insisted Ringo was 50 miles away that same day. Then investigators found something that shouldn't exist. According to the coroner's report, Ringo's stomach contained no alcohol impossible for a man supposedly on a days-long drinking binge. This single fact proves it wasn't suicide, as drunken depression was the official theory. The evidence pointed to something impossible. Johnny Ringo may have been sober and clear-headed when he rode to his death. Consider this reconstruction of Ringo's final ride. On July 12th or 13th, the exact date remains a mystery. Ringo left Galeyville heading west toward the Chiricahua Mountains. He told no one his destination. This violated every survival rule in Apache country where traveling alone meant death. But Johnny Ringo wasn't running from Apaches. Turkey Creek Canyon offered the perfect meeting spot. Isolated, with multiple escape routes, yet close enough to Tombstone for a quick ride. The canyon's narrow approaches meant no one could sneak up undetected. Unless, of course, you were expecting them. What happened in those missing hours defies logic. Ringo, the most paranoid gunfighter in Arizona, apparently dismounted, removed his boots, and sat under an oak tree. His horse was found 2 miles away, still saddled. No signs of struggle, no defensive wounds, just a single bullet hole in his right temple. The killer made one crucial error that exposed the truth. Ringo's cartridge belt was found upside down on his body. No gunfighter would wear his belt this way. The cartridges would fall out. Someone had removed the belt after death and replaced it incorrectly. This is the moment everything unraveled for the official story. The physical evidence screamed murder, not suicide. The bullet trajectory, entering behind the right ear and exiting near the left eye, suggested Ringo never saw his killer. The absence of powder burns meant the shot came from distance, not a self-inflicted contact wound. But the real mystery was just beginning. That fully loaded Colt 45 destroyed the suicide theory completely. Every gunfighter, including Ringo, carried their pistol with the hammer resting on an empty chamber for safety. A man planning suicide wouldn't load that 6th round. There was no point. But a man expecting trouble would load every chamber. The most chilling part was yet to come. Analysis of the death scene revealed Ringo had been sitting peacefully when shot. No defensive posture, no hand near his gun. He was either completely surprised or, more disturbingly, he knew and trusted his killer. 4 men would eventually claim credit for killing Johnny Ringo, each with compelling motives and opportunity. Wyatt Earp, despite being in Colorado, hinted at involvement in later interviews. Doc Holliday, supposedly in a Colorado court on July 14th, had friends who swore he was actually in Arizona. Frank Leslie, a Tombstone gambler and gunman, confessed on his deathbed. But was he confusing Ringo with another killing? And Michael O'Rourke, known as Johnny Behind the Deuce, bragged about the killing while drunk. Then came the discovery that changed everything. A 5th possibility emerged from examining the evidence. Ringo may have been killed by one of his own. The cowboys, seeing their empire crumbling and blaming Ringo's leadership, might have eliminated their own king. The upside-down cartridge belt suggested someone unfamiliar with gunfighter customs, perhaps a cowboy who usually ambushed unarmed victims. Ask yourself, why would Johnny Ringo, paranoid and hunted, ride alone into an isolated canyon? The answer lay in those 6 loaded chambers. He was meeting someone he thought he could trust, someone who promised information, or money, or safe passage. Someone who got close enough to put a bullet in his brain before the West's fastest gun could react. The rendezvous theory gains credibility from one overlooked detail. Fresh horse tracks led away from the scene, heading toward Tombstone. The killer didn't flee to Mexico or hide in the mountains. They rode back to civilization, confident they'd never be suspected. What followed would shatter the cowboy alliance forever. On July 14th, everything changed. James Yoas couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong that morning. His freight wagon, loaded with supplies for the mining camps, creaked along the Turkey Creek Canyon Trail as the July sun climbed higher. The horses, normally steady, kept tossing their heads and snorting. Then they stopped entirely, refusing to move forward despite his urgings. Through the shimmering heat, Yoas saw what spooked them. A large oak tree stood beside the trail, and beneath it, a figure sat motionless. As Yoas approached, details emerged that would haunt him forever. A man propped against the trunk, head tilted at an unnatural angle, dried blood painting the bark behind him. But wait, it gets stranger. The body was Johnny Ringo, and he looked almost peaceful except for the neat hole in his right temple. His right hand clutched a Colt .45, finger outside the trigger guard. The gun's weight had pulled his arm down across his lap. Strangest of all, Ringo's coat was buttoned despite the July heat. Yoas's hands trembled as he examined the scene without disturbing anything. Years of frontier life had taught him to read death, and this scene screamed wrong. The blood pattern suggested Ringo had been sitting upright when shot, not lying down. The exit wound near his left eye meant the bullet traveled at an angle impossible for self-infliction. This single bullet would rewrite history. Yoas noted every detail. Ringo's boots, one on and one off, lay near the body. His hat sat perfectly placed on his head. No signs of struggle disturbed the ground. Most damning of all, that Colt .45 showed no powder residue, no evidence of recent firing. All 6 chambers remained loaded, waiting for a fight that never came. Cochise County Coroner Frank White arrived at Turkey Creek Canyon 6 hours after Yoas's discovery. What he found challenged everything he knew about frontier justice. The death scene posed more questions than answers, each detail adding to the mystery. The gun's position defied physics. For Ringo to shoot himself in the right temple with his right hand, then have the gun fall naturally across his lap, required impossible contortions. The bullet's trajectory, entering behind the ear and exiting through the eye socket, suggested the shooter stood above and behind Ringo. Here's the detail that changes everything about the case. Ringo's cartridge belt was fastened upside down, cartridges pointing skyward. No experienced gunman would wear his belt this way. The rounds would fall out with movement. Someone unfamiliar with gunfighter habits had dressed the corpse. Physical evidence contradicted the suicide ruling at every turn. The missing powder burns proved the shot came from at least 18 inches away, impossible for self-infliction. Ringo's horse, found 2 miles distant, still wearing saddle and bridle, suggested he'd dismounted voluntarily, not been thrown or ambushed while riding. But the coroner faced pressure to close the case quickly. The Cowboys were finished as an organized force, and Tombstone's business leaders wanted the violent era buried with Ringo. White's official report mentioned suicide as the probable cause, despite evidence suggesting otherwise. Statistical shock: 100% of confirmed frontier suicides showed powder burns and empty chambers. Ringo's death showed neither. The coroner's jury, assembled hastily from local men, ruled suicide after minimal deliberation. They wanted Johnny Ringo underground and forgotten. What investigators found next defied all logic. Ringo's pockets contained $3.50, a pocket watch, and personal letters. Robbers would have taken these items. His guns worth hundreds of dollars remained untouched. This wasn't robbery gone wrong. This was execution. The truth about Johnny Ringo's death lies hidden among 4 men who claimed the killing, each with motive, means, and opportunity. Their conflicting stories create a maze of deception that historians still struggle to navigate. Wyatt Earp topped every suspect list. His vendetta against the Cowboys who killed Morgan made Ringo a prime target. But Earp had an alibi. He was in Gunnison, Colorado, on July 14th, hundreds of miles away. Or was he? Fred Dodge, Earp's friend and undercover Wells Fargo agent, later hinted that Wyatt's alibi might have been fabricated. Wyatt had friends who'd swear to anything, Dodge wrote in his memoirs. The Earp theory gains credibility from Wyatt's own words. In later interviews, he spoke cryptically about Ringo's death. He got what was coming. Every dog has his day. When pressed for details, Earp would only smile and change the subject. His wife Josephine's memoirs, edited heavily before publication, originally contained passages about Ringo that publishers deemed too revealing. Then came the revelation that shocked even hardened lawman Doc Holliday might have been in Arizona, not Colorado. While court records show Holliday in Pueblo on July 11th, the consumptive gambler had 7 days to reach Turkey Creek Canyon. A hard ride, but possible. Holliday's hatred for Ringo ran deep, and his tuberculosis gave him nothing to lose. Big Nose Kate, Holliday's sometime lover, told conflicting stories about his whereabouts. First, she swore he never left Colorado. Years later, drunk and bitter, she claimed Doc bragged about settling with Ringo once and for all. Which version was true? Kate took that secret to her grave. Frank Leslie presented the strangest claim. The Tombstone bartender and part-time lawman had no known grudge against Ringo. Yet in 1925, dying in California, Leslie allegedly confessed to killing Johnny Ringo. But Leslie was also known for killing Billy Claiborne in Tombstone. Had his failing memory confused the two deaths? This changes our entire understanding when we examine Michael O'Rourke, Johnny behind the deuce. This small-time gambler had every reason to hate Ringo, who'd publicly humiliated him in Tombstone. O'Rourke disappeared from Arizona shortly after Ringo's death, later surfacing in Texas, where he bragged about killing the king of the cowboys. But O'Rourke's timeline creates problems. Witnesses placed him in Charleston on July 13th, 30 miles from Turkey Creek. Could this minor gambler have arranged a meeting with the paranoid Ringo, or was he simply claiming credit for another's work? The answer was hiding in plain sight all along. Each suspect's story contained truth mixed with lies. Perhaps multiple men conspired to kill Ringo, each playing a role, all claiming full credit. The fragmented testimonies might reflect a fragmented conspiracy. One detail everyone overlooked. Whoever killed Ringo knew his habits intimately. They knew he'd come alone to a meeting. They knew he'd dismount and make himself comfortable. They knew he'd let his guard down just enough. This suggests either a friend's betrayal or an enemy's elaborate deception. The forensic evidence allows us to reconstruct Johnny Ringo's final moments with chilling clarity. He rode into Turkey Creek Canyon, expecting a meeting, not an ambush. The killer was already there, hidden among the rocks above the oak tree, waiting with patience born of careful planning. Ringo dismounted, perhaps called out a greeting. He removed one boot. It was rubbing a blister. He sat beneath the oak tree's shade, pistol holstered but fully loaded. The very fact he relaxed enough to remove footwear proves he felt safe initially. The killer moved into position above and behind Ringo. The angle of death bullet entering behind the right ear, traveling downward and forward, reveals the shooter's location. They stood on the slope above, perhaps 12 to 15 feet away, pistol aimed downward. This is the moment everything unraveled for Johnny Ringo. He may have heard movement, started to turn, but too late. The bullet struck before his legendary reflexes could save him. His hand never reached his gun. The West's most feared shootist died without firing a shot. What happened next sent shockwaves through the territory forever. The killer approached the body, verified death, then staged the scene. They placed Ringo's pistol in his dead hand, trying to suggest suicide. But their unfamiliarity with gunfighter customs betrayed them. The upside-down cartridge belt, the fully loaded chambers, the coat buttoned in July heat. Here's where the official story falls apart completely. The killer made no attempt to hide the body or take valuables. They wanted Johnny Ringo found, identified, and buried quickly. This wasn't just murder, it was a message. The king of the cowboys was dead. Long live the new order in Tombstone. Why did Tombstone authorities rush to rule Johnny Ringo's death a suicide despite overwhelming evidence of murder? The answer reveals the dark machinery of frontier politics and the price of peace in a violent land. Sheriff Johnny Behan faced a crisis. His cowboy allies were scattered or dead, his authority crumbling. Investigating Ringo's murder meant admitting the Vendetta war continued, potentially bringing federal intervention. Behan needed this case closed and forgotten. The business community shared Behan's urgency. Tombstone's silver mines required Eastern investment, impossible while gunfights made headlines. Johnny Ringo alive was bad for business. Johnny Ringo murdered was worse. But Johnny Ringo a suicide? That story sold peace and prosperity. This single fact proves the cover-up. The coroner's inquest lasted less than 2 hours. No serious investigation examined the physical evidence. No witnesses testified about Ringo's final days. The jury of townsmen understood their role, declare suicide, and move on. Even more damning, official records from the investigation vanished. The coroner's detailed notes, witness statements, even the death certificate disappeared from county files. Only newspaper accounts and personal letters preserve any details of the investigation. But someone wanted Ringo silenced forever, and they succeeded. Within days of the rushed inquest, Johnny Ringo was buried in an unmarked grave. No funeral service, no mourners except his killers, perhaps watching from distant hills. The cowboys didn't even claim their king's body. The truth was more sinister than any gunfight. Powerful forces in Tombstone conspired to bury not just Johnny Ringo but the entire cowboy era. His death marked a turning point, from lawless frontier to civilized territory. The price of that transformation? Truth itself. The moment the news hit Tombstone, everything changed forever. The news of Johnny Ringo's death spread through Tombstone like wildfire on July 15th, 1882. In the Oriental Saloon, cowboys sat in stunned silence. Their king was dead, found like a common suicide under a tree. The psychological impact was immediate and devastating. If Johnny Ringo, the most feared gunfighter in Arizona, could die without pulling his weapon, what chance did ordinary outlaws have? Here's what the history books won't tell you about that day. Ike Clanton, upon hearing the news, reportedly turned white and left town within hours. Other cowboys followed suit. The gang that had terrorized southern Arizona for years began dissolving like morning mist. Without Ringo's leadership and reputation, they were just common thieves facing an increasingly hostile population. The power vacuum created chaos among the remaining cowboys. Pete Spence and Frank Stillwell were already dead. Curly Bill Brocius lay buried at Iron Springs. Now Johnny Ringo joined them. The triumvirate of cowboy leadership was gone, leaving followers without direction or protection. Rustling operations ground to halt as participants fled to Mexico or points unknown. But Ringo's death meant more than anyone realized at the time. Sheriff Johnny Behan's authority, already weakened by his cowboy associations, collapsed entirely. Unable to maintain order or collect taxes from the disbanded gang, Behan found himself politically isolated. Within months, he would lose his position to a reform candidate. The statistics tell a remarkable story. In the 6 months before Ringo's death, Tombstone averaged 12 violent crimes weekly. In the 6 months after, that number dropped to 7, a 40% reduction. Cattle rustling reports fell by 60%. The murder rate plummeted. The reign of terror was over. What nobody expected was how quickly Tombstone would transform. With the cowboys scattered, legitimate businesses flourished. Eastern investors, previously frightened by the territory's reputation, began funding new mines and enterprises. The very men who might have ordered Ringo's death profited from the peace that followed. The funeral, if you could call it that, reflected Ringo's fallen status. No cowboys attended, fearing guilt by association. The few mourners were curiosity seekers, and county officials ensuring proper burial. They laid the king of the cowboys in an unmarked grave, exact location disputed to this day. 3 different sites in Tombstone's Boot Hill Cemetery claim to hold his remains. This is where the story takes its darkest turn yet. Ringo's family in California received notification weeks later. His sisters, respectable women trying to forget their brother's infamy, made no effort to claim the body or investigate his death. The $3.50 found in his pockets wouldn't even cover burial expenses. His guns, worth hundreds, disappeared into private collections. Wyatt Earp, conveniently in Colorado during the death, made sure newspapers reported his alibi prominently. Yet private letters suggest satisfaction with events in Arizona. "The account is squared," he wrote to friend John Flood. Was this reference to Morgan's murder, or something more specific? Doc Holliday's reaction proved equally telling. Upon hearing of Ringo's death, witnesses say he raised a glass and quoted Shakespeare. "The evil that men do lives after them. The good is oft interred with their bones." When asked directly about involvement, Holliday would only cough, his tuberculosis conveniently ending conversations. The immediate aftermath saw other cowboys meet similar fates. Ike Clanton, paranoid and drinking heavily, would die in a gunfight within 5 years. Johnny Barnes fled to Texas but couldn't escape his past, dying in a saloon shootout. The Clanton Ranch, once headquarters for a criminal empire, stood abandoned within months. But the real mystery was just beginning to unfold. Frank Leslie, who would later confess to the killing, behaved strangely after Ringo's death. He quit his bartending job, left Tombstone briefly, then returned with unexplained wealth. When questioned about his movements in July 1882, Leslie's stories never quite matched. The pattern was clear. Everyone connected to Ringo's death prospered, while those loyal to him perished. It suggested not random violence, but calculated assassination with powerful backing. The cowboys had threatened the wrong interests, and Johnny Ringo paid the ultimate price. Within 1 year of Ringo's death, the cowboy organization ceased to exist. Their rustling network, once moving thousands of cattle annually, vanished. The corrupt officials who protected them found themselves voted out or indicted. The transformation was so complete that visitors to Tombstone in 1883 described it as almost civilized. Statistical shock reveals the truth. Of the 24 known cowboy leaders active in 1882, only 6 remained in Arizona by 1884. The rest were dead, imprisoned, or vanished. No criminal organization in the Old West collapsed so quickly or completely. Johnny Ringo's death wasn't just murder. It was the execution of an entire way of life. But Ringo's death meant more than anyone realized. The death of Johnny Ringo marked the end of the classical gunfighter era in the American West. Within a decade of that July morning in Turkey Creek Canyon, the open range closed, the frontier towns incorporated, and the age of the quick-draw artist faded into legend. Ringo's loaded gun became a symbol, the old ways dying with chambers still full, never getting the chance to fire. Modern Tombstone trades on its violent past, but sanitizes the reality. Tourists photograph themselves at the supposed grave sites, buy replica Colt 45s, and watch reenactments of gunfights. What they don't see is the truth. Johnny Ringo's death represented not romantic heroism, but the brutal economics of frontier capitalism, eliminating obstacles to progress. The 4 competing death theories persist because each serves different narratives. Wyatt Earp as killer satisfies those wanting heroic justice for Morgan. Doc Holliday's involvement appeals to those preferring gothic revenge tales. Frank Leslie's confession offers random violence as explanation. The suicide theory, despite overwhelming contrary evidence, comforts those believing evil self-destructs. Here's where the official story falls apart one final time. Modern forensic analysis of the death scene descriptions, conducted by criminal investigators studying historical documents, unanimously concludes homicide. The bullet trajectory, the absence of powder burns, the staged scene all point to murder. Yet the myth of suicide persists in many histories. Hollywood's treatment of Johnny Ringo reveals more about American mythology than historical truth. From 1950s B-westerns to 1993's Tombstone, featuring Val Kilmer's memorable Doc Holliday, films transform Ringo into a romantic anti-hero. The real Ringo, educated, alcoholic, probably psychopathic, doesn't fit the narrative needs of entertainment. The loaded gun remains the eternal mystery's core. Why didn't Johnny Ringo, paranoid, deadly, expecting trouble, defend himself? The answer challenges everything we believe about the Wild West. Perhaps the fastest gun doesn't always win. Perhaps reputation means nothing to a hidden rifle. Perhaps the Old West died not in blazing noon gunfights, but in shadowed canyon ambushes. What would you do if faced with this evidence? The most likely scenario, synthesizing all available facts: Johnny Ringo was murdered by someone he knew, possibly a cowboy cutting a deal with the New Order. The killer used Ringo's trust to get close, then eliminated him on behalf of Tombstone's business interests. The cover-up succeeded because everyone benefited from Ringo's death, except the dying cowboys themselves. This changes our entire understanding of frontier justice. The Wild West's most feared gunslinger died without firing a shot because the rules had changed. The age of the gunfighter was ending, replaced by the age of incorporation, investment, and industrialization. Johnny Ringo's death was both murder and metamorphosis. Think about it. One loaded gun that never fired changed the American frontier forever. The cowboys dissolved, Tombstone transformed, the gunfighter era ended, all because Johnny Ringo died with 6 bullets he never got to use. The most feared gunslinger died without firing a shot, because in the end, the Wild West's justice came not from a showdown, but from the shadows. The king of the cowboys died as the Old West itself died, suddenly, violently, and shrouded in mystery that echoes through history. The loaded gun tells us everything. Johnny Ringo was ready for a fight that never came, prepared for an enemy who was really a friend, armed against everything except the betrayal that killed him.